You're listening to a download from the outdoorstation.co.uk. Number 536.
Hello everyone, and welcome back once again to the Outdoors Station. I'm your host, Bob Cartwright, and in the library of 536 podcasts, you'll be aware that we like to dip our toes into all aspects of self-powered travel from time to time and reflect on how we can maintain a balanced view on enjoying a healthy outdoors life whilst respecting the environment at the same time. Now, here's a thought. Just imagine if we only had access to 4% of the land we currently choose to use and enjoy in normal non-COVID times. Yes, 4%. Well, that would be like going back to the Kinder Scout Trespass of 1932, which eventually led to the creation of the National Parks legislation, the Pennine Way, and the Countryside and Rights of Way Act. Well, you see, 4% is the current access situation on our waterways and inland rivers. Ben Seal, Places to Paddle Manager from British Canoeing, was my guest this week on the video live stream. And as you'll hear, the general assumption that we have the same kind of water access freedom as the equivalent Countryside and Rights of Way Act is completely wrong. So how does this affect you if you're a hiker or a cyclist? Well, all I can say is that as time goes by, your activity tastes may change. You may have a family in the future, or new friends, or decide one day that wild swimming or paddling or canoeing is for you. In which case, this discussion contains vital information you should be aware of. But before we start, I should mention that everything we discuss in this live stream and podcast, the links can be found over on the outdoorstation.co.uk and the show notes for this podcast. Good evening everyone, and welcome once again to another live stream here on the Outdoors Station, and hopefully an enjoyable and educational and stimulating evening we hope it will be, with some good conversation. And I can see we've got a good 20 or so viewers at the moment, so I'm hoping that will increase over time. As you saw in the introduction, we are going to be talking about access to our waterways, and perhaps finding out a few facts which I certainly didn't know before I started doing the review and getting the backstory into the access campaign. Of course, once again, we do have Rose in the chat room. Here's Rose.
Hi, everyone.
Looking after people once again, and we are just outside of Upton-on-Severn, so we're fairly familiar with water because it seems to be coming our way at the moment. It's rising rapidly, and we've had the water come down the Severn and all the various things that go along with that as well. So not exactly pleasant water for paddling, swimming or otherwise. So my guest this evening is Ben Seal from British Canoe, who is get the title right, Places to Paddle Manager. And so welcome to you, Ben.
Good evening, Bob. Good evening, everybody. It's lovely to be here. Lovely to have the chance to talk to you all. Looking forward to a good evening of chat.
Excellent. Well, Ben, I mean, the title of your job is obviously fairly interesting, and it wouldn't be one that I would assume existed as such, because I assumed, as I said in the introduction prior to delving into the backstory, as it were, that we had more access to the waterways, and obviously being surrounded by water as I am at the moment, I've always assumed that everybody had the same access. So would you like to just give us a bit of a backstory as regards what the historical aspect is of the access to waterways?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and again, thanks for having me on tonight, Bob. It's great to be able to talk to everybody about this subject, and it's a subject that not a lot of people know or understand or appreciate the problems that are associated with access to water. I suppose what I would start by saying is I think I've probably got one of the best jobs at British Canoeing. I get to try and campaign for more places for people to paddle, and of course places to paddle are fundamental to our sport, getting on the water and being able to be active, and that's not always possible, and it's not always clear within our sport where and how we can get on the water. So there's only actually a small percentage of all the waterways in England that have what's called a statutory right of navigation. So there's a clear right in law to say that you have a right to be there in your boat, in your whether you're swimming or canoeing or kayaking, whatever you're doing. There's only just less than 4% that have that statutory right of navigation, and by and large, those are the ones that you can imagine on like the Thames and the Severn, where you see the bigger boats, and you pay a license fee to be on there. For the rest of the 97% of waterways, the law isn't particularly clear, and there's been a long history of debate, discussion, disagreement over whether you have or haven't got a right to be able to go and enjoy the waterways for whatever enjoyable purposes that you so wish. And that's really the nub of it, really. There are two schools of thought. There's one school of thought that suggests that rivers are private. Rivers should be off limits to anybody but those who have probably paid for a right to fish, or to the landowners themselves. And there's another school of thought that we subscribe to, is that we've always had that right. It's always been available to us all. Rivers and waterways are places that we all, the population grew up around our rivers. The civilization grew up around rivers. We hunt and fish and travel and we take part in recreation around these rivers. And that right has never been extinguished. And there's lots of evidence to support that view. And we believe rivers should be open to all, just like mountains and moors and heath, in open access land. And our waterways should be similar, with careful management, careful restriction where there's evidence to need that. But broadly speaking, we should all have the right to be able to enjoy these spaces together and share them.
Yeah. We've got a few people putting comments in the chat room. You're more than welcome to do that, folks. Anything interesting that pops up, we'll put that towards Ben. And certainly later on towards the end of the show, we'll have a sort of serious Q&A. So whatever comes out of the discussion, just put a capital Q at the beginning of your question so we can spot it easily, because they tend to suddenly come in a rush. But Ben, I mean, as I say, I've been surrounded by water where I'm based in the UK, and I've always assumed people have leisure access. I've seen them obviously enjoying the canals, the rivers, I suppose occasional lakes, because most lakes that I know in this area are certainly on private land, which I presume you're not sort of seeking to get access to. So what's the progress? How do you change things from the way they are? It's a long, hard process of campaigning for change. Ultimately, what we're seeking, what British Canoeing is campaigning for, what our community would like to see is open access to waterways. And we launched Clear Access, Clear Waters. We launched a charter and our campaign down in Westminster in 2018. And really, it's calling for fair, shared, sustainable, open access to our waterways. And that means that we want to be able to have the same freedoms that people do to explore, like I said, the mountains and moors and heath. We want to be able to have that same right to be able to enjoy those spaces. So really, the only way to tackle that is new legislation, to get real clarity, to get it absolutely clear. We believe the only way is to pursue new legislation. And of course, that's an incredibly challenging thing to try and do, is to get legislation, especially in present climate of COVID and Brexit and all the other priorities that are on the government's agenda. To seek legislation to change access to waterways is a ferociously difficult thing to do, but it has to remain our ultimate aim. And there are things that we can do in the meantime to try and encourage people to share the waterways in a responsible way. We can work on other pieces of legislation that might affect and influence and improve that access, but we believe at some point in the future there needs to be a change in the law to make it really clear that swimmers and paddlers can all go and enjoy these special places. Let's actually talk about specifics. We're not just talking about sort of paddling, canoeing. There are other water users, as well as the people that obviously want to take a walk down by the waterside, by the rivers and so on. So it isn't purely, you're not just looking after the sort of the canoe aspect, that sort of part of the community.
No, I mean, British Canoe launched the Clear Access, Clear Waters campaign, but the ambition of the campaign is there for anybody who wants to be able to access the water. So, for example, a massive group that has grown hugely in this last year is outdoor swimmers, wild swimmers, people who want to go and swim in rivers, swim in outdoor spaces. They face the same challenges around access that paddlers do, and paddleboarders and kayakers, and all these people face similar issues and want similar freedoms to be able to go and enjoy the thing that they love doing. Last year, 2020, was a massively challenging year for everybody. Everybody's got their own reasons. The sports sector has really taken a big hit. But one of the positive things to come out of last year was a lot of people found activities on their doorstep. They found new activities that they might not have done before, and paddle sport. Our membership grew by a massive amount. We went from around 38,500 members to just around 63,000 members at the turn of the year. So a lot of people found water sports. They found these places and wanted to take part. And I think it's now time that we need to address the barriers, the problems associated with access to water, make it really clear and make sure these people can access it on their doorstep without the threat of challenge or worse.
And what is the actual situation then, and where can't people go at the moment? I mean, if I was to leave here and walk the length of the Severn, I'm unaware that there are areas that I can't go, apart from, obviously, as I say, somebody's private property. So, the implication you're saying that there's only 4% that you've got access to, how would somebody recognise they don't have access to a certain length of waterway?
It's a really good question, Bob, and it's an interesting one to answer. If we break it down into canals and rivers and lakes, we can talk about lakes. If you think about canals and major navigation, so navigations like the Severn and the Thames, where you see boat traffic or bigger boats, they're the statutory navigations. They're the ones that you pay a license fee, and it's clear in law that you have a right to be there. Absolutely crystal clear, and those are the ones there is absolutely no dispute over. So you can go and have a look on our paddle points map on the Go Paddling website, and you can see all those statutory navigations mapped out, and you can see the ones where there are absolutely no problems. If you think about all the rivers, pretty much everything else, that's where there are issues. Now, by and large, people paddle on most rivers in some way. Where the problem arises is where you get conflict, where you get people shouting from the bank. Sometimes it's verbal abuse. Sometimes it converges into physical abuse, where there are certain hotspots where we find around the country certain rivers that are more sensitive than others, making paddlers and swimmers feel unwelcome. So there are lots of places that we can paddle, where we have a clear right to paddle. There are lots of places on those other 97%, where people do paddle, but there are pockets and places whereby some rivers are quite sensitive, and that's where we get the real problems around conflict and abuse, and that's what we need to tackle. And that the way of tackling that is to make it clear in law. Now, just to mention lakes. Lakes are an interesting one because they vary so much. You've got reservoirs, you've got natural lakes, you've got all sorts, and it's not really a very clear picture of where you can and can't, and it's worth checking locally. There's lots of lakes in the Lake District, obviously, but each one has a different restrictions and rules and regulations and bylaws that cover whether you can and can't. So with lakes and reservoirs, it's very much you have to check with each one, check in advance. There's lots of information on our Go Paddling website that you can use to find that information.
I was going to say, is your website the de facto place to look for permissions, or is the environmental website, the environmental agency website, is that another area? How would people specifically find definite data?
Because it's a difficult question to seek clarity on. It's difficult to be able to say there's one point of to find information. But we launched paddle points on the Go Paddling website. It was last year, and it's a user generated map of lots of points all over the country where you can launch and land, places to eat and park, and it gives you lots of information, and it's populated by paddlers. So the information on there is as up to date as it can be, and there's lots and lots of information. So we'd like to think it is becoming the place to go and find information on where to go paddling. It obviously relies on paddlers to input, so the more people who go in there and add points, the better. And the amount of traffic we saw last year through paddle points was phenomenal. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people hitting the website, especially from sort of May time onwards, as we saw our membership rise, more people finding paddle sport, using the Go Paddling website to go and find places to go paddling. So, there are lots of websites out there, and I wouldn't want to say that we're the best and the brightest and the most definitive, but we certainly want to become the place where people can find the information they need on the Go Paddling website.
I suppose the other thing then that immediately comes to mind, and we're having a similar thing here in the Malverns, is that people are assuming that the open land, the hills as they are, they're free to come and do whatever they like. They don't seem to sort of understand that they are as managed as private land is. All land in this country is managed by somebody, and obviously managed as regards an environmental point of view and a access point of view and taking care and all the various things. How are you finding that challenge of educating the new waterways users, or those who want to jump in a canoe or in the water or swim somewhere, to understand the environmental and also get that balance going,
Yeah. I think with the increase in people accessing the countryside last year, there were of course the natural associated problems with more people going to the countryside. There was lots more stories of litter being dropped. Some stories of antisocial behaviour, people parking inappropriately. But that's not confined to paddle sport. That's generally how an influx of new people to the countryside created problems more acutely than they probably existed before, but they were more acute during lockdown last year with the volume of people. I think you can look at it two ways. You can look at it as a massive negative, and of course, it is seeing litter and all those things. But you've got to understand that a lot of these people may not have been to the countryside before. They may not have. They don't know the norms. They may not understand, where it is appropriate to park. Don't block gates. Don't drop litter. There might not be access to toilets. There are lots of cultural norms around. People who are in the outdoors already might understand. And so what we need to do is make sure that people have the right information before they go to the countryside. I know that they're working on updating the countryside code at the moment. And things like that is really important to make sure that people are aware of how they need to behave when they go to the countryside, and much more needs to be done about that. But the other way of looking at it is it's a massive positive that all these people have found the countryside. These people have found new places to go and be active. It's done massive amounts for our well-being. I think one of the most important things, and without getting political at all, but one of the most important things that Boris announced was that physical activity could carry on during lockdown, and that has been absolutely critical for our mental and physical well-being, the ability to go out and walk and cycle and paddle and fish and play golf. And there were lots of sports in that first lockdown that were allowed to carry on. And that has been so crucial to our physical and mental well-being. And actually, even more so, those people who've gone to the countryside, being out in those natural spaces, being out in the national parks, or even if it's just on the edge of the city, being able to get to those spaces is so important. So we have to be careful. We have to understand there are challenges. We have to understand that, with more people going to the countryside, there are challenges that need to be met, planned for, guidance, advice that needs to go out there. But we also need to celebrate the fact that more people, we are a better society when we can access the countryside, when we can be active outdoors, when we can share these spaces. And we've got a massive opportunity now, Bob, that, coming out of COVID, there's going to be a lot of things that, one of the things that we're going to have to work out with the green recovery is how can we be a fitter, healthier nation, and tackling access inequality, such as access to waterways, is one of those ways that we can make our country healthier, fitter, happier in the future.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. But I, as you were saying it, I was thinking, well, those people that are have recognised that during the first couple of lockdowns, when they could get out and have exercise and have a bit of freedom, this third lockdown has taken a darker edge to it, let alone the sad situation with regard to the numbers at the moment. And I think people, when springtime comes, will be desperate to get out. It's just how to get the environmental, the educational, the awareness message to them, whether they're walking on the hills or whether they're paddling on the rivers, to find the right balance, I guess. And it's a real challenge. And I suppose what do you rely on? Do you rely on social media, word of mouth? Because obviously a group of people that have never done any particular outdoor activity before, when they're doing it for the first time, they're just enthusiastic and full of beans, and they just want to get out there and do it. And of course, as soon as somebody says, well, hang on a second, that's not the right way to do it, or be careful of, then you get this sort of tensions arising. And I suppose in some respects, it's a bit like road users. You're in a situation where you've got everything from walkers, cyclists, horse riders, motorcyclists, cars, vans, and then big trucks. You've got to have a natural understanding and awareness of each other's situation and respect for each other to make it work and make it efficient, because there is only so much land we've got in this country, obviously, and we've got to make the best use of it, haven't we?
You're absolutely right. We live on a small island, Bob, and there's only a certain amount of space that we can share. It's important that we're tolerant of each other. Not all of us like to go do the same activity. Look, we all enjoy doing different things. That's what makes us such a vibrant, community of interest groups, backgrounds, cultures. So it's important that we're all tolerant of each other's rights to be able to go and enjoy that space. But with that comes a real need to act responsibly. In Scotland, they have something called the Land Reform Act, which enables people to have a much more freer access to the countryside than we do here in England. But that they get that right on the basis that they exercise that right with responsibility, that they don't set fires, they don't act irresponsibly, that they respect other users. And I think there's a lot that we can take example from the access code in Scotland and apply in England and in Wales. And your question about how do we speak to these people? Well, I don't think there's one answer to that, and there'll be some challenges around how they relaunch the countryside code when it comes. How are we going to communicate that message? Is it TV media? Is it news? Is it print media? Is it social media? There's no one solution. It's got to be a coordinated effort to reach, the broadest spectrum of society. But you're right. It's absolutely critical we get that message out. People are, like me, caged animals at the moment. I've not had my fix of hills. I live on the edge of the Peak District, and obviously not being able to travel far from home, I can go around the countryside around my house, but I like to go up pointy things. I like to go up things with height where I can look down, and it's frustrating. And I know there's millions of people in the same boat. I want to go paddling, I want to go doing all these things, but we've just got to be patient. We've got to take our time, and when we do get that opportunity, not just rushing out there and it's just being mindful. There are communities out there, local people who are suffering as well, and then we just need to be very, very responsible in how we go about pursuing our passions.
Indeed. And then the other thing that we were talking about before we went on air was the current situation with regards to the floods, the endless rain that we seem to have had, followed by the snow, followed by yet more rain. I've got a forecast of a week's worth of rain here. Our ground is already sodden, and as I said, we live on the River Severn, and that is flooded. Our village is completely flooded. There's only one access in and out, and I know in Derbyshire you've had your fair share. In fact, we've had your cast-offs as it's come down the river, obviously. What it's leading to is also not just water that's coming down the river. We're getting all sorts of unusual items as well, floating and getting clogged in the bridges and the various pontoons and that sort of things on the riverside. Now, I know that you're quite keen on the environmental aspect and certainly for the access that canoeists have in general to be able to get to awkward places where a lot of this litter and flood debris has rested.
That's right. Clear Access, Clear Waters isn't just an access campaign, and it's really important to remember that it's an environmental campaign as well. It's all about the protection and the sustainability of our rivers and making sure that we as a community, as water users, are taking responsibility for caring for these spaces and minimising our impact, but doing what we can to tackle the plastic pollution. Before the pandemic, we were facing obesity crisis. We were facing a climate change crisis. Plastic pollution was in the headlines, weekly, daily, and it's not gone away. There is increasing amounts of plastic that's ending up in the oceans, and it starts somewhere. It starts in our rivers, and it starts in our towns, and in our rubbish bins that blow into the rivers. And you'd be amazed at the stuff that you can find in these rivers. And I'm no scientist, but I know that plastic and pollution like that in rivers is not good for my health. It's not good for the health of the river, and it's not good for my children. I don't want them to go paddling in a river that is full of bottles and Starbucks cups and cans and all sorts of other junk. So it's important as a community that we take it seriously. That we do a lot here. The paddle cleanups happen all over the country, and I applaud everybody who takes the time to take 1, 2, 3 pieces of litter out of the water. But there's lots of clubs and groups like the one that I've been involved in called Paddle Peak, who go out and do big cleanups on rivers. There's quite an active group here on the River Derwent in Derbyshire. And the sorts of things that we pull out, from deck chairs to umbrellas, lawnmowers, laptops, it's sad that our rivers and our waterways are becoming rubbish bins, the dead end for the stuff that we don't want, and that only amplifies that kind of disconnection that we have with our rivers, especially urban rivers. People they turn their backs on them almost these days because they're not nice spaces to be in, and they shouldn't be like that. And the paddlers, I know anglers, and lots of water users are taking action against plastic pollution. It's critical that we take that responsibility really seriously as custodians of this space.
I mean, the natural question is obviously how does all this rubbish end up in the river? Because obviously, presumably, some of it is naturally picked up by the floods off the outside of the normal river course. But then you've got people who are willfully depositing items in there. There's somebody's popped a question about saying, what's the situation like with fishermen generally? Are fishermen fairly affable when it comes to paddlers, or is there a lot of tension?
Lauren, I wouldn't hide away from the fact that there are lots of tensions that exist between some anglers and some paddlers. But what I would say is this: is that it's not representative of the entire community at all. That by and large we can coexist. We do coexist on most rivers and waterways. It's just how it works. But of course, that there is a lot of tension in sensitive areas where fishermen can be quite territorial about their space because they want their peace and quiet. They've paid to there, and I can understand that. So we do get tensions with anglers, but it doesn't just boil down to canoeists versus anglers. It's much more than that. It's about the freedom, the freedom in law to be able to go and enjoy these spaces and share them together. So yes, I wouldn't shy away from the fact that we do have our problems. We get incident reports where neither group is completely innocent, but it just comes down to that tolerance again, I think, is people just learning to share the space and understanding that we all need our space to go and do our thing.
We did have a conversation with somebody earlier on from Scotland, and he was very, what's the word? Sorry?
Dismissive?
Oh, dismissive. Well, dismissive of the problems down here, certainly. He was like, we can go virtually anywhere. They seem to be enlightened up there. And are you aware of how the tensions are in Scotland? Have they found a natural balance with keeping all the different interests happy?
I wouldn't say that Scotland is without problems entirely, but what they have in Scotland is they have absolute clarity that both parties have a right to be there. So where the tensions arise around practicality and about how they physically share the space and giving each other the room to do that. And of course that happens in any sport, whether it be cyclists and road users or cyclists and mountain bikers and walkers. There's always going to be tension because we've only ever got a finite amount of room. What we need to remove is the principal argument of, do we have a right? Do we have a right? Have you not got a right? We need to clear that up. That's why we need the clarity in law. Then we can focus on the practicalities of how we share the space. And Scotland isn't without its issues. It never will be. But they are one step ahead in terms of they've solved the principal issue of there is a clear right. Everybody is there and needs to share the space with responsibility.
Okay, folks. Well, we are sort of moving forward on the time as anticipated. If you've got some questions or any thoughts that you might have regarding this subject matter or anything you want to put to Ben, please sort of jot that down. YouTube seems to be the most efficient way at the moment. They seem to be up to speed. For some reason, Facebook seems to be a couple of minutes behind for whatever reason. So if you do have any questions, obviously jot them down now, and if you can put a capital Q at the front, that'll make it easier for us to spot them. But just to let you know, we do have another show coming obviously next week, and here's a little bit more information about it. Yes, and now I've just spotted that I made the mistake of actually putting the 10th of February there. We're not speaking to Chris Townsend next week. He's the week after. Next week, we're actually speaking to Fran Chirauskis from Seizure Adventure about epilepsy and getting out and about, and obviously having various adventures yourself. Okay, so we've got a couple of notes coming in. I see Martha's written and also Mark Jan. In fact, there's Mark Jan's got a good question here, which I think I'll flag up now. Where are we? Which I think is interesting because Mark is, I believe he's Dutch. Forgive me, Mark, if I'm not correct on that score. And he was saying, I never understand that the water is owned by one who can then say you're not allowed on it. I know we sort of touched on it before, but for somebody that's not a British national, as it were, do you think you could explain it in different terms?
I can try. And hello, Mark. We have met before. I know Mark, and it's a good question. It is a good question. The general convention with ownership is that normally landowners will own to the centre of the riverbed. So they will own the land, the riverbank, and to the centre of the river. And there are exceptions to that. Sometimes the riverbed itself can be owned entirely. We own a section of riverbed at Simmons Yacht on the River Wye. So we own the riverbed, we don't own the banks, which is quite bizarre. Sometimes the landowner can own both banks and the riverbed. So it's never a clear picture. Now, in terms of the water, it's a really interesting kind of point. Nobody owns the water. The Crown owns the water, as I understand it. And so, there is a school of thought to say, look, hey, I'm paddling along the water and nobody owns the water, and I'm passing through your land and you can't stop me and I'm not trespassing. It's a difficult one to give you a clear, definitive answer on, and if I'm honest, the only way really is that you would get clarity is that if it was tested in court somehow, and I've always said I don't believe that is the way forward for anything. Testing these things in court. I think we need to we need to get clarity in law, a definitive clarity in law, iron these things out, make sure it's really clear for everybody to understand where they can and can't, and that's the way we go forward. So yeah, it's an interesting point around who owns which bit and which bit you can paddle on, and does that mean you're trespassing if you're only on the water and you're above the riverbank? It's a very interesting point. Don't know if I'm giving you a clear answer there, but I'm sure there's lots and lots and lots of people out there who would have differing opinions.
I think that certainly helps. We've got a good handful of questions coming through now, so we'll start going through them. So John Chewin, I hope I've got your name correct, John. I'm interested to know how we can develop the national campaign through the English Forum, RDT and clubs in order to give direction at a local level.
Yeah, that's a good question, and hello, John, again, somebody else I know and have met, and interestingly, he's based on the Severn. I know he's on one of the clubs on the Severn, so not too far away from yourself, Bob. Really good question, John. And for anybody who doesn't know, RDT is a regional development team, so we have a network of regional teams made up of volunteers who are committed to developing canoeing and paddle sport within their region, everything from coaching to opportunities for young people to clear access, clear waters. And it's a really good question, because we're just about in the hopefully next few months is to start rolling out club campaigners. So we want to get a network of people within clubs, within our club networks, to be club campaigners, to champion it within their club, to be active locally, to get the campaign heard on a local level. Of course, there's 3 people in my team. We've got some wonderful volunteers, but if we're going to get that penetration and the coverage at a local level, we need clubs. There are arteries and veins. There are real eyes and ears on the ground, and we need to have those key advocates within those clubs. So, that's one way, is to get involved in the Clear Access, Clear Water Club Campaigner scheme that we're going to roll out. And there's loads of things that clubs and regional development teams, anybody can do. And one of the simplest things to help raise the profile is get involved in river cleanups, and shout about it. Get right into your MP, raise this issue with your MP, get it in the local press. One of the key problems that we have with this whole subject is the visibility. Is people are surprised when they hear about the situation with regards to access to water, and so we need to tell more people. We need to get more and more people shouting about it. So anything that can be done on a local level, whether it's doing river cleans, get it in the local media, right into your local MP, right into your local councillor. These are all actions that you can do to help move the campaign forward. So I hope that answers. And John, you can get in touch with me and by any means, and we can pick that up. But absolutely, lots of ways to get involved.
Wonderful. We've got one from Charles Roche. Good evening, Charles. Nice to see you on board. Ben, how much faith do you see in working collaboratively with other outdoor sports? Do you think that canoeing access problems are quite specific? And he's got another question coming later.
That's a really good question. And I'm really pleased you've asked it, Charles. So thank you for the question. At the moment, we work really, really closely with lots of different sports, particularly the BMC, British Mountaineering, the Ramblers, Outdoor Spaces Society, people like Cycling UK, all got very similar interests, very similar priorities. So towards the summer, towards the end of last year, as a little collective, we were working really hard on something called the Agriculture Bill. We're currently working on the Environment Bill, and the interests that we've all got are very similar in trying to affect that legislation to improve access to the countryside. And one of my things I keep saying at the moment is we need to remember the countryside is blue as well as brown and green. There are blue bits, there are rivers in there, and actually we're working really nicely as a collective of outdoor sports. But as well, we work really well with team water sports, if you want to call it that, the likes of rowing and sailing, swimming, all the watery type sports. So there's a lot of common ground between the land and the water sports. Some of the NGBs we call national governing bodies like BMC Ramblers we're very, very closely aligned to. And actually, Bob, we share a lot of members with these people. There's research out there to show that people who are interested in paddling are also likely to be climbers or walkers, and people who are cyclists, people who, I think that there's some stats around people who are into sailing, their second sport is pretty much likely to be canoeing or kayaking. So, there's a lot of crossover between these sports, and actually working together as organisations, we have a much, much, much louder voice when we're trying to lobby government. So it's a really good question and something very current that we're involved in.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that score. I'd certainly heard that, and certainly, I mean, cross training has become much more popular. So generally, people who run do cycle or paddle or whatever it may be for overall muscle development. So it's understandable that if you've got one piece of equipment, you'll use it for a variety of sports. Charles's second question, I think you've just answered actually. Do you need to get the little stuff right for those in canoes, or is the bigger problem the overall access? And I think you've answered that.
Yeah, all I'd add to that is, that if I'm honest, canoeists, paddlers, paddleboarders shouting for legislation on waterway access is a hard battle to win because of the noise and all the other demands on government for legislation. We might have a fantastic case, but it's a real challenge being heard and getting that legislation we need. But if we can ally with people to get general access, whether that's an amendment to the Countryside and Rights of Way Act, or whether it's something within the new agriculture bill or some more protections in the environment bill, if we can do that as a collective, for access in general, then that is a much, much, much easier battle to fight than if we're just fighting it alone on our own. So, yeah, we are working as a collective. But, of course, British Canoe, we're here to represent the interests of paddlers, paddleboarders, kayakers, canoes, all those. That's obviously our priority. But working as an outdoor sector, we have a much greater chance of affecting change.
One from Shuey. I miscalled him before and called him Shiwi, which he didn't like, so I do apologise. Shuey, we need a Scandinavian approach to respecting our outdoor spaces. Do you think that could ever be possible in this country? Education, again, exploring the education topic?
Yeah, look, I wouldn't profess to be an expert on how other European countries. I know a little bit about some countries, and I know that Scandinavian countries have a completely different approach towards their outdoors from school age, from how they get their kids involved in nature all the way through life. And I don't think there's a model that we should just take off the shelf and copy. I think we need an English and a Welsh solution. We need one that is bespoke and fit for purpose for our country. The Scottish Land Reform Act wouldn't just drop into England, but there are lots of principles that we can take, and there are lots of principles that maybe we should learn from, how Scandinavian countries educate their children from a very young age about the outdoors and make them, their resilience and all those great assets that we can take from the outdoors is built in from a young age. And I think that is something we should definitely learn from other countries.
And talking of other countries, Martha, who's watching from Canada at the moment, the canoe is part of Canada's DNA, and one of the oldest pieces of legislation is the Navigable Waters Protection Act of 1882, but we lack the right to roam, and NWPA is being eroded, so keep up the fight.
Wow, that's really interesting. Thanks for getting in touch, Martha. And I'm fascinated because, it's really interesting to learn about how other countries, the problems they have. I was talking to one of our new coaches who started recently, who's Swiss, and she was explaining that they have very similar problems with us. They have the similar tensions with anglers and the similar lack of clarity on their waterways, and I hadn't realised that about Switzerland. I think I had a picture in my mind of what I thought it was like, and it's fascinating that in Canada that you also don't have everything as sorted as we might imagine. So I'm going to have a look at that, and I'd like to find out a bit more. So thanks for getting in touch.
Okay, so we're sort of starting to wind up the show now. What do we take away from this? What do we need to do? Where do we need to go to help or apply pressure or whatever?
Well, I guess I started to allude to some of it when I was responding to John and his question around what can be done on a local level. Fundamentally, it comes down to making noise, Bob. We've got to raise the profile of this issue. it's not an issue if nobody says anything about it. It's just, it'll remain the same. We can all shout and scream about how we don't like it, but if we're not prepared to do stuff, we're not prepared to contact our MP, then we can never affect change. So what I would encourage people to do is to go and have a look at the Clear Access Clear Waters website and to add their name to the petition. We've got 10,000 signatures on there. I'd like to think, we've got 63,000 members. All our members should be looking at that and hopefully supporting it. But there are 2.1 million people who paddle each year. There are another 2 million people who are supposed to be outdoor swimming. This issue affects a lot of people. We've got to make a lot of noise about it. We've got to contact our MPs. We've got to speak about it openly. But we've also got to show that we are a responsible group of people, and that if we are given this right, then we can exercise it responsibly. So my message would be for any paddlers out there is to paddle responsibly and respectfully. Avoid conflict where you can, and defuse situations if you get into conflict. We want to share spaces. We want to be a tolerant user of the waterways. We want to get along with people, and we want to take our responsibility to care for these places really seriously. So we should be out there cleaning those rivers. We should be check, clean, drying our boat. A whole world of things that we could have talked about around keeping our boats free from invasive species, making sure that we wipe them down, wash them down after we use them. About being a responsible user, and that's the takeaway message. Be a responsible user, sign up to the campaign, support the petition, and make some noise about it, because that's the only way we will affect change with regard to access to waterways.
Well, for people that obviously want to follow you and the various places to make some noise or get some more information, obviously you're on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, and the various websites. If people aren't following us already, it'd be very nice if they could follow us on our social media. And if you do go to the website, please join the newsletter, because it is the easiest way to get hold of people. For those who might be interested in listening to podcasts, we've got 535 podcasts in the library, making us the longest running outdoors podcast in the world. And thanks to everybody who are supporting the Outdoor Station, be it contributors, guests, newsletter members, listeners, and of course you, the viewers, and the few special people that have actually made a small donation as well. So thank you very much indeed for that. Well, I don't think there's anything else that we need to touch on, Ben, is there? Anything that we missed?
No. Look, and it's just to wish everybody out there, a safe, healthy, period until we can get to a point where we can all be out in the outdoors again, enjoying ourselves, being safe, being responsible. Let's just be patient. Let's just hang tight, look after each other, and be kind to each other. That's all I'd leave people with.
Great words. Okay then, folks. Well, thanks very much indeed. As I say, we're back next week talking to a Fran from Seizure Adventure. So do come along and join in with that one if you would. And of course, we are speaking to the well-known outdoors man, Chris Townsend, in 2 weeks' time. Sorry about playing the wrong video, but hey, such is life. Until next time, folks, take care out there and look after yourself. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To hear or see more from our extensive free library, please visit theoutdoorstation.co.uk.